Welcome, everybody, to today's council meeting, Wednesday, February 28th. Actually, excuse me, special meeting. And we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And with that, I'll pass it to Clementine to do roll call vote and then share with the public on how they can participate in public comment.
Councilmember Barber,
Present.
Councilmember Garcia,
Here.
Councilmember Hoffa,
Here.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
and Mayor Williamson.
Here.
And information on participating in today's meeting and providing public comment, including remotely by Zoom or telephone, is available on the agenda, which is online at isearchmonterey.org. Remote commenters, you will be muted until it is your turn to speak, and a timer will be shown on the screen. If you're connected on Zoom, the timer is accurate with no delay. In the chamber, we recommend wearing masks and ask attendees to keep phones and devices muted to prevent audio interference with the meeting. Thank you for participating in your city government.
All right. And with that, I will ask Councilmember Smith to kick us off with the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Please join us. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks, Ed. And with that, we will go into our study session. The only item on today's agenda is a review of the Monterey Rental Assistance Program guidelines. Appreciate staff working on this. I know that this was something that was put into our budget from at the beginning of this fiscal year. And so with that, I'll pass it to Hans for staff presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are literally trying to invent something that we have never done before. We did a rental assistance program during COVID, but that was based on federal guidelines. This one is now, as council listened to concerns by renter advocates, also a program that is funded solely out of the general fund. And so we can give ourselves the same different rules and can select different criteria for rental programs. It doesn't get audited by the federal authorities like our previous rental program. So we are basically on new land here. This is nouveau legislation or ordinance that we try to create. Our housing office was not staffed until I believe mid-November last year, and at that time when Anastasia came on board, we gave her the task to continue or implement the rental registry that was just starting at that time. And as soon as we had a little bit of clear sight with respect to the process and the software installed, etc., we asked Anastasia to figure out the rental assistance program. We have also enhanced our staffing levels. And so what we are presenting to you today is just an update. It's just a check-in, also to hear what you have heard and what you like and what you don't like. Where do you want to draw a line? Where do you think we missed the boat? And again, we are still in probably at a 75% level right now, and we hope to bring you something back in a very short time span, because we want to start spending the money as soon as possible. So with that, I introduce to you Anastasia Wyatt, our housing manager, and she will dazzle you with, I think, 21 slides or so.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me here today. Just wanted to, I'm Anastasia Wyatt, your housing manager.
I was going to say, Anastasia, this is your first time presenting to us?
It is.
Woo!
Yay.
A milestone. I'm excited. I love Anastasia, by the way. It's just like not much of a secret, but she's amazing. And I'm just really glad that you're on the team. So sorry for interrupting.
No, thank you so much. And just my staff, I wanted to recognize Jacob Baranya. And I do have our intern, Christoph Pere, here as well. So we'll be doing further outreach in the coming week and a half or two. And just wanted to recognize them for the work they also put into this rental assistance program that we're presenting here this afternoon. So currently we have $200,000 of city general funds assigned to this program. And it is definitely consistent with the city's strategic initiative to improve the quality of life for, this would specifically help struggling and lower income residents in the community. And we have completed a lot of community outreach so far. So at different parks and at the farmers market, we've heard a lot of valuable input at these venues. We have further input opportunities at the Sports Center, San Carlos Beach, and MPC. We're looking forward to hearing from students that we know are also struggling, people who are probably working and also going to school. So in addition to this outreach that I've noted on these slides, we have also been discussing rental assistance with various nonprofits, Community Human Services, Interim Inc., our fair housing provider, Eden Fair Housing, and many more. We've also been speaking with property managers as we've been going through the rental inventory program, and we've been working with property managers. We've taken the opportunity to speak with them and discuss what are they seeing as issues with their renters right now. One of the top things that we heard from the property managers, because they're seeing people who can't pay their rent or not, or what are the issues? And a lot of them are saying, as soon as people realize they can't pay their rent, they're just leaving. So this is causing displacement in our community. The survey we've also had out to the public. We've had over 187 responses to date, and this survey was available in English and Spanish. And it's still available and will be available until we come back in March. And I'll provide you further input from the survey when I return to council. Some of the questions here focused on a lot of people were maybe a little tired of our survey, to be honest. There's 2 pages. There was a lot of information in the survey, but we asked a lot of questions to gauge the community on various inputs. So program focus, and some of it may sound a little redundant, like people are like, why are you asking? It almost seems like the same thing, but for us, it's a little bit different, maybe asking the same question in various ways to really hone in on important factors that would go into the program. So assistance to secure, maintain housing was the top priority for a rental assistance program based on the input we received. Financial assistance to prevent homelessness and assistance due to loss or change in employment. These are all in based on highest importance to least importance, and eviction prevention and housing relocation and stabilization. So in the housing world, these terms all have different meanings. So just to kind of give you an idea of why we're asking some of these similar things. And in the homeless world, when we're looking at homeless funding, some of this crosses over into more definitions and more information that we're thinking about. So the question number 2 was how to use the funds. One of the priorities was deposit assistance. So as people, if they're displaced from one unit, they may need help covering a deposit. If they're homeless, they may not have that deposit money. If you're a family, it may be hard to come up with that. So that was a top priority. Covering rent increases is another priority. Financial assistance could come in different methods that we'll get into later. Short-term rental assistance. I have spoken to several people that need some short-term rental assistance right now. So this program is very needed. I have people waiting, ready to go. Hopefully we can help them in time. Rental arrears, back and rent owed, and application fees is another big one. So if you're somebody out there and you're trying to get an apartment and you're applying to multiple places, and it's quite unfair, and you often end up paying many different landlords for the application fee. So the program eligibility, question 3, who should be eligible? And the majority of our residents felt that and respondents felt that it should be residents of the city of Monterey who are assisted. We also felt that we could consider people who work in Monterey, but maybe don't live in Monterey. So that is one area you may want to think about. A program priority, urgency of assistance needed was a top priority for people. And so far in the draft guidelines, we say we should focus on urgency, but there may be other factors that come into play on how we provide assistance. First come, first served basis was also another, the second response. So here we get into rental assistance survey, low income, who should be helped? Should it be higher level incomes? When we say low income, it's 80% area median income and below. And most people felt that we should be assisting lower income people. There were quite a few respondents that also felt that median income, so 80 to 120% AMI could also be helped. When we look at the AMI charts, I just want to say area median income charts, we tend to look at HUD for some of our programming because you're a city with HUD funds. And then we also look at housing and community development, the state of California. So the state of California goes up to a higher income level. They show us that 80 to 120% AMI because we in California have much higher costs than most parts of the country. HUD is focused mostly on that 80% AMI and below. So your HUD program's really focused there. So that is why you see such a difference between the 80 to 120% AMI, typically not receiving assistance, because federally, the 80% and below AMI is typically what the federal funds go to help. So that's a lot of the difference that you see in the area median income charts. And some people, and I know that this is something that we have to consider in California and Monterey and high cost areas, is how can we help that gap of 80 to 120% AMI? And since we're not held to any federal regulations in this program, you may want to consider helping the 80 to 120% AMI as well. I do like the freedom that we're able to consider in this program that we maybe haven't ever been able to consider in your prior rental assistance programs. And this question is the total amount of assistance. So this is a tough one too, because I have been speaking to people who, there are people, and I know in the emergency rental assistance program that we saw during COVID, that they covered everything. So you may have people out there who expect us to just cover $40,000 if they have rental arrears and everything. In this program, because there's only $200,000, we really want to help people. So it will be a fine balance of helping people, and helping as many people as possible. I think that we may need a limit, and most of the population and respondents felt that we should help people up to $5,000. The next highest was up to $10,000, and then $3,000. We did speak to Eden, our fair housing, and they're helping people in the Bay Area helping other jurisdictions run their rental assistance programs, and they were going only up to $3,000. So it's okay to make limits, and we will see how this plays out. We recommended in the draft to up to 5,000 currently. And I will get into, there's an additional 3,000 that we recommend in a minute. So what should rental assistance cover? This is another area where you have consideration in this program. Only a portion of the rent was the majority of the respondents. So people may say, well, hopefully people are working, maybe they've fallen behind, maybe their hours have been cut. We can help a portion of the rent from what they can't handle. The next was any expense necessary, and followed by the entire rent. And this is how many times should people receive assistance? So if we help somebody one time, will they still need assistance? And most people felt helping people multiple times was reasonable. But again, you may want to consider that maybe we help them with 2,500 this month and 2,500 next month. So that could be how we help them multiple times. Receiving housing resources. So this is maybe we refer them to other resources such as CalFresh, CalWorks. Maybe people aren't collecting Social Security. I have run into many people that they get to the end of the month and they can't pay their rent, but they need food assistance. So maybe we send them over to food assistance programs. I've seriously told somebody in the past, like, stop buying food. Please go to the food bank and get food there so you can save your money to pay other expenses. Sometimes these are conversations that you have to help people with. And so this is one of those, should we provide other resources? This question gets into financial counseling. So people may need a little bit of financial counseling. This isn't something that people teach in school. And sometimes we need to help people with, let's look at your budget. Let's figure out how we can help you this one time, but then look at your overall expenses and see if there's tweaks in your budget. Or I've had people who haven't signed up for Social Security yet, and they're 65 and they can be getting their Social Security and paying their rent. So those are other types of counseling or problem solving that we can bring into the program. And we can work with other housing agencies. Jacob Varanya is great. He's really understanding property management. He's worked in this field before. He understands some of the issues that are coming up and how we could, we might need a little support with a housing counseling agency such as Eden. And we also may want to work with them on help us coach this person. We can do most of the coaching, but maybe we want to rely and ask a question to them. This is another area where we want to consider. And I just mentioned in the staff report that I looked at other programs, best practices, countrywide, statewide, and legal services. Sometimes it's just intervention on a legal matter that can be make or break somebody getting evicted. And so how can we help someone? Could we help them with one-time legal services that could be, and most programs mentioned one time because we don't want to get, we only have a limited amount of money. We can probably help them one time just to maybe do that mediation. It could be legal services, mediation, whatever's needed to give them that assistance that could be make or break them staying in the unit. As I've been here the past few months, I've called a couple of landlords to try to intervene on some evictions, and we've been successful in those. The landlords have been willing to work with us and talk to us. And one woman in particular that we worked with, we called up Echo. We were able to, she didn't understand a clause in her lease. I seriously had 5 minutes, called her landlord to the end of the day, and her lease was expiring in 5 minutes. And they were willing to extend it for 3 more days so that we could go through her lease one more time. We were able to negotiate one thing. I'm no attorney, but some of the things we can do, but sometimes you need an attorney involved. So that legal services is something that we're also recommending, that we have a $5,000 for rental assistance. And if somebody needs additional services, we maybe add in $3,000 more. This could be the difference. That it could make a real impact in keeping people housed. So after all that to consider, now I want to get into your AFFH, your affirmatively furthering fair housing, which was something new in this housing element. City of Monterey is a HUD entitlement community, and you've always had an analysis of impediments to fair housing. The affirmatively furthering fair housing, or AFFH, is also a very similar type of report that details how can we further fair housing. What are the impediments to our community to fair housing? How do we help people who are low to moderate income, who have disabilities? Just different impediments that may make it more difficult. Families can have a more difficult time with renting a property. These types of impediments or difficulties that our population experiences are really detailed in this AFFH document. So it's great. This is the very first time it's ever come into your housing element. And so for me, this is always one of my favorite documents because I'm a nerd and this is what I think about all day. And, but the analysis of impediments tells me what's going on in the community. Is there overcrowding that needs to be solved? Are there jobs, housing imbalances that we need to think about? Are people commuting really far? So all of these factor in. So I've chosen a few slides from your AFFH. You may notice that the data seems a little older, but this was the data tool required for everybody in California to utilize for this document. So everybody had to pull the data from a data tool that the state required us to utilize. So it is the most current that everybody is utilizing right now. So this is our low mod areas in the community. And I was just scanning through your housing element right before this, and about 40% of our community, 38% roughly, are low to moderate income. And again, thinking back to that HUD definition, that 80% AMI and lower. And so these are where we're seeing our low to mod area communities in our area. Another interesting factor, because female-headed households, our female-headed households overall are a small portion of the entire population. Most of our households are comprised of families with two parents, but those female-headed households may have lower incomes, may have children, they may face more barriers and difficulty in paying the rent, and they seem to be concentrated here in this area. Housing vouchers is another consideration. So people have housing vouchers either through project-based vouchers. So when you build a new project, like the Mid-Penn project that will come up behind City Hall, hopefully in the coming years, that should have a certain number of project-based vouchers. And this helps with the longevity of the project, and people who end up in those units also will have a voucher that they have that will help them pay the rent. So those are people who they probably will need, they'll be lower income to qualify for the voucher, but they have that for life if they stay in the unit, which is fantastic. So we look at how many housing vouchers are utilized in our community. And I will say this, that I feel there's a lot of the housing vouchers are not in the city of Monterey right now. So that are allocated for our entire county. It's something we're always looking at. It could be that it's costlier to rent a unit in Monterey. So maybe that voucher stretches a little bit farther somewhere else. And also we didn't have as many projects that were utilizing project-based vouchers. I know from working in Salinas, we had the housing authority there. They owned a lot of property, and a lot of units were built on those properties that they owned. And so a lot of project-based vouchers went into those affordable units. So over time, I want to see us getting more vouchers here in the city of Monterey.
Real quick on this slide, could you just help us out with the key a little bit? It's hard to read. What is the darker? And
That darker part is, I think, I can't
those
see it.
project-based,
That's where the
higher
most-
density.
5 to 15%
Right.
housing vouchers.
That's where we're seeing the most vouchers.
It's good vision.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah. So that's.
Oh, okay. He blew it up for the record. He has it bigger on his screen.
It's a feature.
Thank you, Hans.
And the other ones is smaller than 5%.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So we do have a lot of more multifamily units, so there may be more apartments, and that's where those vouchers are coming into play. And then this slide is renter cost burden. So if you're paying more than 30% of your income on rent, your cost burden, and if you're severely cost burden, you're paying 50 to 80%.
So the lighter color is 40 to 60%, and the darker, I would call it red, is 60 to 80%. Overpayment by renters, 60 to 80%, the dark red, 40 to 60%, the lighter color.
I would just point out, it looks like it's pretty much the entire city, just for the record. So just putting that out there. All right.
And then this is risk of displacement. So this is what I mentioned before, is where are we at risk of populations being displaced? And so we want to try to prevent displacement, because as a community, it's hard to see your neighbors leave. And we don't want to see, we rely on our neighbors, watch the dog, help with the kids. People don't want to leave their community most of the time. So we really want to prevent displacement. But to me, that's a top priority when we're thinking about housing. So this program could really help people who are at risk of displacement. So you can see the areas in orange. Hans, do you want to give us another?
I love to. So nobody on the presidio of Monterey is in risk of displacement. That's the gray color. The light brown color. I'm really bad with color, so I call it light brown. Is lower displacement risk, and then the darker brown is at risk of displacement. So we see three different categories in that chart. Gray basically means nobody gets displaced on the presidio, and light means lower displacement, and darker at risk of displacement.
So again, we may have a higher risk of displacement, again, in the areas where we have more multifamily, where people are renters. We talked to a lot of people that were renters that it's so expensive. They're having a hard times. Their landlords aren't keeping up with maintenance, and they feel squeezed there, so that could be why there's more risk in those areas. So in this slide, so I'm done with the AFFH slides that I pulled out that I just wanted to utilize and give you a little background and plug that part of your housing element, because it's my favorite. And then we did recommend in the draft guidelines that we provide $5,000 in assistance per applicant one time a year. And I did say one time because I think the people we'll be helping will have multiple months of rent maybe that they need help with. And I think we'll be able to help them one time and cover where they're at with whatever needs they have. I did also add $3,000 in additional assistance for one-time legal fees, mediation, or tenant landlord services. And if we provided, and this is just breaking down the scenarios, if we provide $3,000 per client, we could serve 67. But if we do the additional 3,000, and again, not everybody will probably need additional services, but if they do, and everybody got 8,000, it'd be 33 people served with this funding. At $5,000, we'd be able to serve 40. And again, not everybody would probably need additional supports, but if they all did, we would end up with 25 people served. At 10,000, you're looking at helping 20 people or 20 families or clients. And then you would have, if additional funding was provided, 15. So it just gives you an idea of how far this money might stretch. We did put in the draft guidelines, and I have found so far that landlords are willing to talk to us through some of our prior engagement with people who have been at risk of eviction in our community that have reached out to our office that we've been able to assist. We're asking, but not a requirement, that landlords allow for unit inspections, that they consider forgiving back rent. These are some of the requirements that were in the prior emergency assistance during COVID. I'm just putting it in there for us to consider and ask landlords, because if we are going to cover some of the rent, could they maybe forgive some of the back rent? They may say no, but we'll ask. It's always, it doesn't hurt to ask. We're just putting it in the guidelines. Consider accepting a fraction of payment. So maybe we say, well, they owe 7,000, but we're going to be able to hand you 5,000 and this person's going to be back on track and they've got all the hours they need. Would you be willing to do that? Maybe they say yes, maybe they say no, but at least we're asking. And that way it could stretch the program farther too. And so maybe they can forgive late fees or not moving forward with an eviction. So these are the types of things not required in the program, but in the guidelines to ask. We are recommending to pay for all of these. This is it's flexible. We don't have any federal guidelines weighing us down or state guidelines like the prior ERAP programs. And so we're saying maybe we cover a little bit of whatever people might need. We really don't know what we're going to face in this program or what, so we just want to leave it flexible and we want to be able to help people however they need. And then after we finish up this round of Monterey Rental Assistance Program is what I'm calling it in the draft guidelines so far, you can change that name. That's what we're recommending, but it's loud out there. You may want to consider decreasing this list or just let us have flexibility, but we could come back to you and let you know how is the program going and what are we seeing that we need to help people with? Is 5,000 enough? Is it not enough? So all of these things we're willing to maybe try out and see, and then come back and let you know how it's all going for the next time you want to do this. Also, we did require that you live in the city of Monterey. That seemed to be one of the things people were strongly saying to us. That they maybe have an experience a loss of income due to a change of employment or a catastrophic event, reduction in hours. That's what we're hearing from some people. They also need to provide us information so we can properly evaluate their situation and make sure that we really are paying the rent that we want to pay. So provide a lease agreement, make sure that they have a history of making their rent payments so that we're not just, that we're making sure we're helping people who are going to stay housed. And we did allow for that 80 to 120% plus the lower incomes. This is your income limits, what is considered based on HCD, and we're only using the HCD limits here because they go up to 120%, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 8-person household. And these would be the income levels that we would be able to assist if we go up to the 120% AMI.
Could you just describe a scenario? I know it's somewhat you can understand it, but could you just describe if there's a family of 4, could you walk us through that and what that income would be?
Sure. So if I'll just go with the top part. If you're 4-person household and you are making less than $15,000, you would be under the acutely low income. So that's how we gauge this chart. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. It's a good question because not everybody uses these tables every day. Also in the draft guidelines, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm going backwards. First come, first serve, I think. Oh yeah, this is how we would assist people. First come, first serve. if there's a risk of homelessness, if assistance is not received, any other urgent requests to be determined. We really don't know what would walk through our door. And we may get we don't know, we may get a lot of applicants or we may get fewer. So we're not that, for $200,000, we have really one staff allotted to this program. We do help each other out, of course, but it would be reasonable for us to take in no more than 20 applications per month for this program, and then really work with 10 people. There's back and forth. We've got to get documents. We've got to work with their landlord. We may need to get other assistance. So we're saying we would take in 20, help the top, 10 or 20 until we get to the end of our program, right? Each month. So that is what we're recommending based on our staffing and the amount of money that is available. And we would repeat this until the funds are expended. And then basically we're saying, like, allow us to determine how urgent it is. We may not, one person's urgency may be different than another person's urgency. And we may be able to assist somebody who only owes $5,000, but not somebody who owes $50,000. So we want to leave room for flexibility, but also allow to help all of these types of situations. And this was another, no duplication of benefits was something that came into the prior program. Sometimes people double dip. And so we want to make sure they're not double dipping, that we know that there's no duplication of benefits. This was a requirement in the prior ERAP program with the feds, and I think it's a good requirement to have.
Is that in a given year or just for the life of the program?
I would say we keep it in the guidelines, making sure that they aren't duplicating benefits, so that if they have a voucher that's paying their rent.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I
that
apologize.
We don't give them funding for the rent on top of the voucher. And then required documentation. This is some of the required documentation. We get a little bit deeper into the guidelines, but you can see that these are things we expect that we would need. And we did speak to your staff that ran the prior rental assistance programs. We also looked at other federal programs to make sure we're collecting all the correct documentation. And the recommendation here is to review the draft Monterey rental assistance program and provide any input on the guidelines. And that concludes this presentation. And the next steps, we would continue collecting survey data until we come back on March 19th, and we continue our engagement efforts. We have 3 great sessions to look forward to. Okay, so now I conclude my presentation. I lied. I had one more slide.
You were close. You were
I was
close.
close, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Anastasia. Great presentation. I appreciate that. It was really informative. Lots of good information in there to just help us have a picture, an idea of what's going on. So with that, I will take it to the council for questions. Who wants to start us off?
I'd like to see a slide again, if I could.
Absolutely, Councilmember Smith.
It was early in your slide deck, and it talked about the choices of if we did 5,000 or if we did 3,000, how many would we serve out of that 200? If you could have that slide just hang there, I think that might be helpful as we hear from the public as well. But I wanted to see that again because I wanted to calculate out, the number of people to be able to help versus, helping on a monthly basis at a higher number, then that decreases the number. So you were talking about the capacity of staff doing about 20 a month.
Right.
So is my number right if we did 3,000 as a max under an urgency, and it's a total of 67 people stretched out over that calculation of 20 a month, give or take? We might be out of funds in 4 months. 3 months to 4 months by the time we process and work with landlords. So we will basically burn through that $200,000 fairly rapidly.
Councilmember Smith, you're correct. Yes, that is definitely the the scenario. This money could go quickly, it could go slower. We'll see.
Yeah, there's variables. It depends on, you might do 16 one month and it rolls over and you get a cooperation from a landlord that is willing to take less to help. But I just love it when staff says I'm right. So I just want to ask that. So you can come back. If you want.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, who wants to go next? Dr. Barber?
Thank you so much. You did a great job. So I understand my colleague, council member Smith's question, but also which he already kind of alluded to, that depends on with those 20 applications, and this is not my question, by the way. With the 20 applications, some of those may not be qualified. Am I right? So it's not saying that you're going to actually help 20 each month, or are you saying that? I guess that's what I'm trying to, because if we're talking about the qualifications, then if you're saying we're going to take in 20 applications, then that's saying, okay, that's our cutoff as far as what we can actually, the burden of the staff to handle 20 applications in, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to actually help 20 people if they're not qualified. It may end up being 10, but you won't know until that comes in there. Is that correct?
Councilmember Dr. Barber, that's correct.
You can just say. Dr. Barber, that's
Okay.
fine. And so, and I know you may not know this other part because it kind of gets into the other pieces, but when you talk about the legal services, would mediation services be included in that?
Dr. Barber, it would be included in, it would be 5,000 and then in addition, 3,000 if they need that assistance.
So that could be a part of it then, right? Since like the legal or either mediation. Okay. All right. That's all my questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Dr. Barber. Councilman Garcia?
Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple questions. You mentioned you received 187 surveys. Would you happen to know how many of those were in Spanish?
Councilmember Garcia, I think so far we have about 16 to 18 in Spanish. And a lot of those were collected on site, and we did work with individuals to like explain the survey, and it was nice to work with the community to obtain some of those surveys, but some are in Spanish, and then we entered those into the survey data.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question, you mentioned that there could be a request for unit inspections. Can you elaborate on that and kind of explain the logic for that?
Sure, Councilmember Garcia, we have heard sometimes people say, well, I have mold. I'm not paying the rent because they're not fixing the mold issue, or they're not fixing some other issue. And so we may want to ask the landlord, could we go in and do an inspection and see what's needed here? Would you be willing to allow us to do this? So that is one thing we want to leave open, that we're paying rent on a habitable unit.
Good, thank you.
Councilmember Hoffa?
Yeah, I have one question having to do with the kind of recommended approved uses. And I think one of them said to cover rent increases. Would that be something where there would be some expectation that we're helping short-term with rent increases, but the expectation would be the tenant would have a plan to make that sustainable? In other words, if we're covering rent increases just in general, is that sustainable as opposed to helping somebody out with an emergency?
Councilmember Hoffa, that's a great question. And it could put the city in a little bit of we've seen stuff where landlords might say, oh, great, let's raise the rent and cover that rent increase. Maybe somebody's just had trouble jumping from a big rent increase, and they're finding other ways to cover that. We could try to determine that. So that could be a situation where we may want to cover that rent increase, but hopefully help them with other supports, make sure long-term that they can continue. And it may be that they can't continue that. Maybe it gives them a couple of months to save up and move on to another unit that they can't afford long-term.
Yeah, the only thing I'm wondering is if it's not sustainable, maybe we'd be better off giving them assistance to relocate. You know what I'm saying? Maybe with the down payment assistance, or not down payment, with the deposit assistance or something. Just a thought. Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Barber, has another question here, so I'll jump back to you real quick.
I'm sorry, I forgot to ask this. Who would the payments go to if we're paying a part of the rent? Is it going to the landlord or to the renter?
Dr. Barber, that's a good question. We definitely want to pay directly to the landlord. That's a best practice.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Thank you.
Okay, so a few questions. The amount that was specified was 200,000, but I thought looking back at the budget session that we had, it was 250. Did that price change at some point? Or is my math just wrong? My view of
What
it.
wasn't a portion of that, the rehabilitation, housing rehabilitation? Of the
I'll try to, you
250?
know what,
Yeah.
I'll cross check.
when
Yeah.
we go out to the public, maybe I'll try to pull it up.
Yeah.
It shouldn't take me a second to pull it up. I'll take a look. In addition to the inspection question, I'm wondering, could an alternative to us inspecting the property be receiving a report from the landlord or the tenant from a specialist in whatever that is, right? So if we have mold, we have a report from a mold specialist identifying that there's mold at this address. Is that an alternative to us inspecting the property? Or could that be an alternative?
Council member or mayor, sorry, that could be an option. Could you explain a little bit more what you're thinking with that?
Yeah, so you were identifying with the idea of us inspecting, you gave the example, if a tenant comes and says, hey, they're not paying it because they have mold in the house, as opposed to us saying, okay, well, we'll ask the landlord to inspect the property ourselves. Could we, as opposed to us inspecting it, ask for a report from a mold specialist that validates that there is mold at this property?
Mayor, we may want to consider then paying for that inspection and having that maybe be the additional 3,000 we could add into the guidelines, pay for, but then it could be that the landlord can't pay for the cleanup of the unit or whatever remediation is needed. So we're getting into if we pay for the inspection report or, we pay for any remediation, that could be something that landlords could also ask us to do.
And Mayor, my name is Kim Cole, Community Development Director for the City of Monterey. I do want to say that we actually regularly do inspections for our housing rehab program, where we use federal funds to rehabilitate a unit. Those are costing us somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 per unit. If there's mold involved, it increases beyond that. I do want to just share with the council, if there comes back a condition that's non-habitable, on occasion, we have to work to move that tenant out of the unit. And sometimes that's a surprise consequence to either homeowners or renters, because it may not be habitable and there may not be funding available to rehabilitate the unit. So I need to put that out there. We're working on a couple very complicated cases right now where we're working with our legal division to have receivers appointed because the person that owns the home isn't able to take care of themselves, and nor do they have heirs. So we're going to the extra mile to have them moved out, the mold removed, and it's a very complicated process. I wanted to let you know it can become very extensive, and my recommendation would probably be that maybe I would just keep it at a staff level inspection and not get into all the technical reports. Maybe later, if we get, more experience, that might be worthwhile.
I think part of where my thought is if they had already did it before they approached the city and they had something, maybe it's a way for the city to save costs. And I didn't want, I was just wondering if there's a way for us to limit spending that 2,000 or 3,000 on city staff time doing that if it had happened to already be done prior to coming and applying to the city.
Most people don't have an inspection.
For sure,
but
for sure,
they're-
for sure. Okay, thank you for that. Could you take a moment to share how this program is different from how the program existed during the pandemic, in particular about how much would be covered for applicants?
Sure, Mayor. In the prior ERAP programs, there were funds, I believe they went through the Department of Labor and then came into the state and passed through the county, and the United Way worked on those funds. And then also there were your CDBG program funding. So those two different federal programs definitely had different limitations. They would help 80% AMI and lower. And especially the Department of Labor program went up to any expense needed for rent, utilities. So I heard of people getting assistance up to like $45,000, so that was an expansive program due to the
Federal.
effects of COVID. It was pretty severe where people lost their jobs for maybe 2 years at a time, and there were heavy impacts. And that's why we did reach out to our landlords, and the different nonprofit agencies, what are they seeing? Who needs assistance? So we could get a kind of an idea as we formed these guidelines. And like I said, a lot of my concern from what I heard was displacement, that the rents are just increasing, and we need to find ways to look at the overall rent increases, and people may need to move. So that's something that we heard a lot of. Other than that, most people, and then, we have the homeless agencies like Community Human Services, Gathering for Women. They do client services. They assist clients. They may need the down payment assistance to help people move from their cars into a unit. So that could mean maybe we can work with the housing authority to get vouchers to people for individual units. So there's a lot that it could help. We'll see how this program plays out.
Was there a limit during the pandemic, was there a limit on how many, I think it was like the amount of months that they would pay for the rent? I think it was maybe 3 months, or was it some kind of limit on that?
Sorry, Mayor, I don't know if there was a limit on the number of months. I can't
Okay.
recall.
Okay. You had mentioned earlier, and maybe I heard you incorrectly, that there were some people already waiting to participate in this program. Do we know about how many people are already waiting for us to get the program up and running?
Mayor, I've personally spoken to 3 people that could have used it. I think Jacob's also had a couple of calls. So we definitely have people. We have had people call from other cities that don't live or work in Monterey that would like the assistance. But again, we're limited in funding. And
Okay, and then this is my last question. I appreciate everybody bearing with me here. And this might be a question for Chrissy, maybe. I wonder if there's any potential concern of a claim of discrimination by us allowing flexibility in determining who to prioritize based off of urgency. I appreciate that methodology and I'm supportive of it, but I just want to make sure that we're good from a legal perspective of any kind of claim that somebody might make that, oh, somebody else went because the city decided that it was more important than mine because of my fill in the blank.
I think that there's always that risk of having someone make claims like that. And I don't know that there's a way to completely absolve that potential, as long as we're following the proper protocols and, administering the program in a race neutral, gender neutral,
Yeah.
way, then we should be okay.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. That's all my questions. With that, we will, Hans.
So it's $250,000 that was on our budget slide. You're absolutely correct. I just verified our budget slide, so we'll make a correction to that. And we had our emergency rental assistance program up to 6 months of rent.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Is the slide that shows this, that Ed had requested to pull back up, was that based off of the 200K?
Yes, so that slide, when we come forward in the final version in March, will be changed.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you for the presentation. We'll take it out to the public for question or for public comment. So for those that are in the chamber, if you would identify yourself by either standing up next to the podium or by raising your hand. And for folks that are online, if you can use the raise hand function. So I see 2 hands up in the chamber. Anybody else? 3 hands, 4. Okay. All right. Let me describe how we're doing this, just so it's clear, because I know that some folks probably haven't been to the council meetings recently. So what we do is we capture, before we open public comment, we capture everybody who wants to speak. Once everybody has identified, we close the opportunity for additional folks to join and have an opportunity to speak. So we provide that opportunity for everybody, but you have to identify yourself in advance. So just real quick in the chamber, by a show of hands, who wants to speak? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 2 in the back, 2 here, and 1 there. 5. Got 5 folks. All right. So we're going to close it for the chambers, and then I'm going to do a countdown for folks online to use the raise hand function to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have 2 folks online. So we'll go ahead and start in the chamber. So if you all wouldn't mind standing up by the podium, and we'll give everybody 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members, and city staff. My name is Adam Pinterest. I'm the Government and Community Affairs Director for the Monterey County Association of Realtors. And I'm really glad that you are considering or working on this program. It proved to be a very effective model during the pandemic. In my opinion, dozens, if not hundreds, of local businesses were either saved altogether or saved a much harder recovery by not having to restaff entirely, by having some people that they could just call right back to work. So to those stakeholders who I know are concerned about the fact that this is taxpayer money going to just a handful of individuals, I say, let's make sure that those are individuals who are clearly in need. Let's make sure that the process is in place to qualify their urgency. And let's help them for not just for their benefit, but for the benefit of our local economy. I do think that it's important that we try and serve as many people as possible. As Councilmember Hoffa pointed out, they really ought to have some kind of financial advising to make sure that we're not helping them out just for them to have the exact same problem in a month and 2 months and 3 months and so on. That's not a long-term solution. So I urge the council to proceed with this in a way that serves as many people as possible and to make sure that they are well qualified. I do appreciate staff's recommendation to keep inspections out of this. While inspections and health codes are very important, those things should be handled by the health department, by code enforcement. That's what those processes are there for. Whereas this is about helping renters not end up homeless or not fall too far behind. And I would hate for trying to do too much with this, ending up causing it to serve fewer people. And if there's any way that the Monterey County Association of Realtors can be helpful in this endeavor, we'd like to talk more. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Catherine Avila, speaking on behalf of myself today, not on behalf of any business, but I would like to thank the City Council for initiating this program. I think it's a worthwhile endeavor, and I know that it'll help a lot of folks in the community. And as a landlord, I'd like to express my strong support for two of the items covered in the ordinance. The first is the need for legal or mediation services, and the second for housing deposit support. These are two items I've encountered myself in the recent past, and I think that extra support and the help of someone like a staff person at the city who's a neutral person would have been really helpful to everyone involved. I think there's more discussion to be had on the topic of covering rent increases with this program. I'm concerned that covering the increases could either prolong the inevitable if the tenant really can't sustain that new rent level, or expose the city to long-term financial obligations. And then on the topic of income levels and who the program covers, there are plenty of people in the community who are often thought of as low income, but who don't meet the definition when you put numbers to it. So for example, I did some quick math just now using the publicly available MPUSD salary schedule. And let's assume we have a married teacher couple, and these two MPUSD employees are intern teachers, so they earn the lowest salary on the teacher pay scale, and that's just under $60,000 each. Combined, they'd make about $120,000 per year. And if you look at that packet, page 13, that table, and look up and, that $120,000 range, you can see that they could easily be making too much depending on if they had children or not, or how many children. So we really want to think through some of those real world scenarios, hearing from those populations that we know need help, and make sure they're covered. And maybe we need to increase that highest income band a little bit to really capture those folks. But overall, I'm supportive and look forward to getting this refined and adopted. So thanks for your time.
Kathy Anderson, homeowners of a couple renters. I just wanted to share with you that 200,000 is just going to be blown away really quickly. I was with a nonprofit recently, and they had that CBG money that came down during the COVID, and I was the one that helped sign checks. I couldn't believe the amount those checks were. PG&E, water. I mean, they're bills. So this 200,000, it's not going to last. It's going to go very quickly. And there's other organizations that could help people that need assistance with rent. You should let them know that the Salvation Army could help. The Housing Resource, the Gathering for Women, the United Way. Don't carry this burden. Pay attention to what you should be doing instead of getting in the property management business. It's a little bit more. And I wouldn't mind if someone said, would you waive the rent for a couple of months? That would be fine. And I'd like that credit to go toward my taxes, that I don't have to pay it. So it's a good wash for both of us.
Hi, Karen O'Neill. Pretty much I agree here with Kim on the business of inspections. I went through a similar situation, and I think that if the city, sent a representative in with the tenant to just look and see what's really going on would be sufficient. And then additionally, her concern, same as mine, is this great program that's getting off the ground is going to need more funds. And so I'm hoping that there's a way that the department, we'll call it, can work maybe with Fed, state, what have you, to try and secure grants of some type to enhance the fund that you're starting with. Because I think that's going to go really fast. And then you're going to wind up 3-4 months down the road and you won't have any money. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Karen. It's good to see you, by the way.
Hi, Esther Malkin. First and foremost, I want to thank the whole housing staff, Kim and Anastasia and Jake. I personally was with them for one of the days that they came out and collected surveys. And I didn't know they both, Anastasia and Kim, spoke Spanish. So that was really fun to watch because they really made an effort at Laguna Grande Park. There was a lot of Spanish speakers there, and they collected a lot of surveys. So thank you to all of them. I wanted to just remind people that the money that we burned through for COVID was countywide. So we're limiting this. So it's going to go farther, even though it's less. I have a couple of questions. I'm curious if the whole double dipping thing is going, if it's still going to be considered double dipping, if they have a voucher, but they can't come up with the balance. That's really not double dipping. So I think we have to be a little more clear on how that's going to be defined and acceptable. Are we going to help relocate people out of the city rather than have them become homeless? I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, but that's a very real possibility because in the city, we don't have enough affordable. So typically they've always had to leave the city to still keep working here. Triage is used as a form of prioritizing in some nonprofits. For example, if somebody has children, they get some sort of priority, as well as seniors on fixed income. Another point, if they have the 5,000 that they've used, but they have not used the additional 3,000 for other services, can they tap into that if they need it? By the way, Monterey College of Law is available to help with these kind of issues. They've been helping, and they have a clinic that is, I don't know if Anastasia knows about, but it's something that we might be able to tap into. And lastly, I know we have to make sure that the landlords get it, but there is a concern of a landlord getting a heads up that somebody can't cover their rent and not renew their lease so that they can get somebody in there that they know will be able to cover the rent, like military or someone that they would consider more stable. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but that's a very real possibility. Thanks.
All right, thank you. We'll take it online.
First, I'm calling on Jean.
Hi, thank you. Jean Rash in Monterey Vista. Esther really hit it on the nose with the mention of families. Nowhere in the agenda literature was the word child or children, and they really have to move up to the front of the line with just a reminder that the MPUSD is saying that somewhere between 10 and 20% of their children are technically unhoused, meaning on auntie's couch or in a car, not necessarily outside, but under substandard situations for learning. And the trauma of homelessness on a child it causes everything that we know about, and all this trauma on children and the mental health crisis that we have in our young people. So somehow in the literature you're putting out, we have to put the kids up to the top. I also join with Councilmember Hoffa's concern about sustainability. And I don't know what the interpretation of that is, but it possibly using the money for emergencies or health emergencies that might be temporary, where they can go back to sustaining the rent rather than a situation where really they're not going to be able to manage and they're going to have to move on. And kudos to Anastasia. That was a fabulous presentation. I'm going to go back and watch it again. The voucher map fascinated me. I've never seen a voucher map, a voucher interpretation that was geographic. I always thought it was, I'd love to talk to her about it. I always thought it was an economic equation rather than a location. So I need to learn about that. I did a lot in my law practice on disability, government benefits. So that was fascinating. Really good presentation. Thank you.
And next, Lori Mazuka.
Good evening, all. I've got a couple of notes here. First of all, great presentation and good points by all the council members in the public comments. Just doing some quick math, and maybe it won't be 100% accurate, but going by the, 66% renters, if I calculate that right, if city of Monterey population is 30,000 and we have about 19,800 renters, and there's 187 that have done the survey, that's not even 1% of the renter population. So I don't know what really to do about that to find out. I personally have survey fatigue at this point, and it does look like you've done a lot of really great outreach, but I'm not sure that's capturing a lot of what some of the, more dire need might be. So anyway, I just throwing that out there that maybe we want to try to get to more than 1% of the renters out there who might need this. And to Councilmember Hoff, as I might be repeating myself because some folks hit some of the points I wanted to ask about, was that what mechanism or criteria or method would be in place to ensure that someone, like, let's say someone needed 2 months or so of back rent paid, and yet they're currently unemployed and no future job prospects, so no real way to pay the future, but rent at this point, but that would be a dire need so that they can stay in the house. I'm just not sure where that would go. Would that be, to some point, some people would need to be counseled on leaving, moving back to another state with family, and how to clarify what level of funds are a tourniquet to stop the bleeding and what level is just more like a small Band-Aid on a gaping wound. That's going to be probably the hardest part for staff to figure out where the need is the greatest. And I think I'll stop there because other folks hit my points, but that was one of the main questions I had, and how you plan to parse that out. So thank you so much.
Righty. I think that was what we had.
That was it. And I just wanted to note, there was someone else who was raising their hand after you did the cutoff. So unfortunately, we won't call on that person.
Okay, perfect. And I'll just explain, just so that it's clear in regards to why we're not calling on that individual. The agenda specifies participation, the rules in regards to participation and public comment. And part of that requirement is for you to raise your hand at the beginning of the public comment period in order to be identified. And then there's a cutoff. So after that opportunity had presented itself, you must have not raised your hand. We're sorry that we can't get to you, but I would still encourage you to share your public comments with the council via email. All right. And with that, I think there were a few questions that came in. I'm not sure if anybody on staff was capturing all of that maybe wants to respond to some of those items. I'm trying to look through my notes too. There was
the
question on
voucher
rent.
and double dipping.
Yep, there was the question on rent increases. Or the idea of question rent increases, which I guess is not really a question for staff. The increase in income cap, which I imagine that's something that we can do. It's our program. We can do whatever we want with that. But there was some feedback there. Let's go one by one, and so that way we don't throw too much at you at one time.
Okay, Mayor, I appreciate that. If somebody has a voucher, it should cover the whole rent. So maybe they're having some other type of situation that they're not able to, that they need assistance, but then that wouldn't be rental assistance, right?
Does the voucher cover utilities? So are there other things that maybe they qualify for that they can use that funding for?
Mayor, there may be other things, so we would have to look at that on an individual basis.
Okay. And then I can't think it was Esther that might have asked I can't remember who asked the question. If the initial 5K was used, can the other 3K be used in support of those other fees that aren't right? Like if they needed the additional 3K for the rent, could they use that 3K for that as well? Or are they restricted to that initial 5K?
Mayor, I think we would, in the way the guidelines are written, that they would have 5,000 in rental assistance, and then the additional 3,000 would cover any other type of counseling or attorney fees. And you could make that more flexible if needed, but currently that's how it's written.
And again, we will process all the input as well. So again, this was a session to figure things out. I can add some more to the numbers used by one of the callers about households, and that's not a lot of people who have responded. Actually, when you know that we have 13,500 households in the city and you take 66%, that's 8,500 households, right? And you have close to 180, 190, 200 responses. That's more than 2%. So it's not that small as the caller was concerned about.
There was a comment made, and I don't know what, this may not be the right setting to ask this question, but if a landlord wanted to forget, or
The taxation.
yeah, the taxation question. So if a landlord wanted to waive rent for a few months, but still use that towards taxes, I'm not sure if that's a question that's directed for staff, if we can answer that question.
Can I answer?
Absolutely.
Because I went through that a couple of years ago. It didn't collect rent, so I don't declare the income. So if you're not collecting the rent when you're paying your income taxes on that business property, you just simply are not reporting that as income to that property.
Okay, perfect. That's kind of what I thought, but
Yeah.
I appreciate you
And
providing.
I think it's not for us to get involved in that,
Yep,
but I think
yep.
that
We're-
it works itself out based on what the property owner does with their tax income.
You're correct, Councilmember Smith.
You're on a roll tonight.
Yeah.
You just need one more and you just hit a home run.
Can you call my wife?
Oh, man.
Councilmember Smith, is your microphone on? We think you
May
might
not
need
be.
to repeat yourself, please.
Okay.
Moment.
It's on.
You want to repeat it?
It's
Hopefully
on.
we got that on record.
No, she'll hear it. That's really good.
Redo.
More important thing.
Okay. And then there was two things. I don't know if this is a question for staff necessarily, but I just kind of wanted to get to county side. I think Esther had spoken to the funding from COVID was with the county. And if I recall correctly, we had our own program before we joined the county program. So I just wanted to draw that distinction that there was two programs that were happening there. And then, anyways, I don't know why I'm talking right now. Let me just stop talking. I think that covered all the questions that I heard. So let's bring it to the council for deliberation and a motion, or no, we don't need a motion. It's just, just a report.
Did you have some things?
So thank you so much again. And I appreciate all the public comments. I think one of the comments that I heard, and I'm not sure whether this would be the place where you would get the answer, but at least you could be thinking about it, was where would if they needed to be relocated, would they be relocated inside the city or out of the city? How would that work? So I would like to make sure that we have an answer to that, because that's important in case we end up seeing that the renter is not able to sustain, as we've been talking about this evening. Then if we're saying there is going to be counseling to help them to relocate, is the relocation inside the city or outside the city? And I think Esther brought that one up. And I thought that was oh, okay, here we go. Anastasia's on a roll.
Dr. Barber, I'm getting my steps. That's good. I think that's up to you. We can clarify that in the guidelines, that if you're wanting to allow it, right now it's residents of Monterey, of the city. And I do believe we have deposit assistance and housing relocation and stabilization. It doesn't specify in the city or outside of the city. So if you'd like to specify, we can do that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. We could be, something that I think that staff should just consider as they move back and forth with that. So I really think this is a great start. I mean, and not that it's a start, it's almost like a continuation because of everything happening during COVID in our city. being one of the first ones to jump on this, but even before federal jumped on this, I think this is a great continuation to help renters. It doesn't mean that you're going to help everybody. I mean, I think all programs, you have to think about that in consideration, that you're not going to help everybody, but it's to be able to have some sort of other assistance that can work with other agencies that are here already doing some of the work. We're not trying to duplicate it or take it, but I think, being able to try to help our neighbors and our citizens here is very important. So I think this is a step in the right direction. I really appreciate the time for us to be able to go through the hiccups that we need to work through, and hearing from the public was very valuable. I think the legal and the mediation is very important. I think the education is invaluable, because most people don't learn any of this in school. And that's something that has been brought up in education for a long time in the high schools and in the universities, that finances are not taught in the high schools. And so therefore you end up having grownups that don't know about finances. And if you're talking about marginalized populations, a lot of times generationally, they don't know either. So I think to be able to help in a lot of situations, it's very valuable to have a program like this, to make sure that the qualification with the money is a qualification with having training. In other words, you're not just handing out a check. You're saying, okay, I need you to put some skin in the game too. And by you put the skin in the game, it's going to the training so that we can help you be a better, management of your money. So it doesn't help you only now, but it's sustainable. So I think this is a great way to continue to move forward.
Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to run through a couple things that are priorities, because I think we're giving guidance to staff as they're going to come back to us in a council meeting in the future as we refine this. A couple things that I think are my priorities. As we're looking at a finite amount of money, if it's $250,000, I think we need to have that firm set of priorities. And for me, the priorities are when there's a family unit, whether it's single parent or two, if there's a child involved. Next, disabilities. Then I think the priorities should be to utilities, health and safety, and then rental assistance when it's an urgency. Because I think that there needs to be the limit, and the limit for me, 3,000 seems to be the right number, because I want to be able to expand it to more people. I want to be careful not to have one family unit that we're helping and we do 5,000, and then we do an additional 3 when we've got 2 other families on the sidelines that 4,000 or 3,000 or 2,000 would have helped. So I'm about wanting to be cognizant of helping as many as we can, rather than allowing the few to stack up. But that has to be worked out with some flexibility, and I understand that, but I want to help the most rather than more money to the few. Counseling, absolutely. You touched on it. Has to be some financial counseling to reorganize their budgets and help them with a pickup, a lift up, and get them started to be independent. Nothing is worse than having to feel like you have to depend on a governmental agency or a nonprofit to go month after month after month. This is so much tied to confidence and pride and your individuality and your ability to really blossom and be the person you should be. And that's to get these anchors off of you. So I think counseling is part of that. So it needs to be an integral requirement. Paying directly to the source. If they're behind payments in PG&E, then PG&E should be able to get the check. If it's rental assistance for the short order and an urgency, then the landlord gets the check. And I think that's the way it operated before. That's the safest way. I'm not interested in doing anything that winds up looking like an incentive that covers rent increases, because I think it needs to be clearly defined that this is in the category of urgency. I know that there may be cases of someone gets a rent increase of 200, let's just say 200, and then they need a few months to catch up and do that. I'd be okay working with that, but I don't want to have it look like there's a pathway for a landlord who says, well, if I increase the rent, I'm going to get paid for it anyway. So somehow we've got to be careful that we're not incentivizing the the money that we're putting in this program that does not benefit the most families that we can benefit. I'm not in favor of inspections. I think we have a pretty robust ability to do that. That falls under our housing department, who has got some experience with this. We have code enforcement, we have public safety, we have building department. So I think we have a variety of resources at the ready. FYI, I had to have a property have some mitigation where we suspected mold. It wasn't. The report was $1,600, and the location was vacant at the time. But I had to do that to resolve it in my mind. But it was $1,600. So I don't think it's a benefit to us to start with throwing inspections that we go out to contractors to do that. I think that our in-house staff does that first, and we leave the inspections and high costs to the property owners. And the question by one of the speakers was, is there another agency that would be better to do this? And I'm thinking, because this comes from CDGB money.
This is our general fund.
So this comes from general fund for 250, and the general fund also comes alongside of CDGB money and also nonprofits that we help as well. And we have over 500 units that are low income that are managed by the city of Monterey. So I guess if there's a way that we feel we need to augment what we do to alleviate staff, and maybe we look at increasing our contract with Echo Housing, where Echo Housing is able to assist, that makes us more efficient and not overtaxing our staff. So I would be open to see if there's opportunities for pieces of other nonprofits or agencies that might be able to come alongside, that we assist and have them participate. In other words, if we have to have a counseling session on financing and the bill for, 3 sessions is $900, maybe Echo Housing can do that for $250. So looking for who's already doing that rather than recreating something else. The other thing I want to cover, and thank you for your patience, I did some math with income levels, and I don't say this arrogantly or with a position of, we all have the capacity. We're fortunate. We have good careers, but I'm looking at this as not so much that the rents are high, but we have a problem that our income is too low across the city, based on when we look at the maps and the number of vouchers and the average incomes. We have some pockets of our community that they simply don't make enough money, especially seniors on a fixed income. So this is a partial solution to help some in the urgency category. But the category that I looked at was, if someone is making $60,000 and their rent is $2,200 a month, $27,600 a year, they're paying 46% of their $60,000 to rent. 46%, but they're making $60,000. Now, obviously, you would say, well, we got to find a place so we can rent something lower. Well, that's hard to do in a coastal town. But if you ratchet it down, if they're making $40,000 and their rent was $1,900 a month, which is hard to find, they're paying 57% in their rent. If their rent is $1,600 a month and they make $38,000 a year, they're paying 50%. So you can see how this equation goes. We don't have rents for $1,100, and we have a lot of people that are making way less than $38,000 a year. So without subsistence and assistance, that there's a lot of folks that can't afford to live here. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't afford, or they should not try and stay here and live here. That's not my message. I'm just saying we have another dilemma, is that Americans across the board from shore to shore do not make enough income to pay for 2024 costs of housing and utilities. And it's a national problem. When we're looking at PG&E bills of $300 and $400 a month, it's a huge problem everywhere we go. But I'm excited to see how this turns out with refinement. And it's our part that we can do as a start of $250,000 to maybe help 50, 60, 70 families. Thank you.
Councilman Garcia.
Thank you. Just a few points, thoughts about process. I think it's really important to have structure, good, solid definitions of what the requirements are, who's eligible, who's not. But at the same time, I think this is a type of resource that requires some flexibility. And it really requires a case-by-case assessment because everybody's situation is going to be different. I don't know what that looks like, but I would just encourage some flexibility in terms of what applicants bring forward. And my next point, relating to a comment that was brought forward by a member in the public, income levels don't equal real world scenarios in many cases. So I think also, right, some flexibility there in terms of who is eligible, who is not. And really, I think going back to paying attention to what their actual situation is at the time. More specific about process and really focusing, I think, on our most vulnerable populations. There, I think we have to be even more flexible in terms of how we're supporting these populations from the very beginning. So from the application process, literacy rates are a thing, education levels are a thing, and what I would encourage is a system that allows folks from these populations to have more in-person support if that's what they need. And also looking at the list of requirements in the staff report, I think about items like bank statements. There are folks who don't believe in banking. So, how do we, how is the system flexible enough to allow folks to apply when they don't have these requirements or they don't have these items that would meet the requirements? One of my first concerns when I was reading the staff report also was to, as Councilmember Smith pointed out, not incentivizing rent increases. So that's all I have. Thank you.
So first, I want to express my appreciation to our staff. I think we've got a really good start here, and this is really exciting. A couple of things. I would also reiterate, again, concern about rent increases and making sure that we're not, as others have said, sort of incentivizing them, and also that there's a sustainability to the assistance that we give. I would also mention, Esther used the word triage. I think that's kind of a good concept for this in terms of prioritizing. I think it is important to kind of circle back to what the mayor was saying about that in the conversation about legal liability. I think it does make sense to kind of have, it doesn't have to be every possible triage scenario, but children, families with children sort of first, disabled or folks with a critical medical condition, maybe second, senior citizens on a fixed income, maybe third, something like that. I just think that that's important to protect us and also to make sure that we are helping the most needy first. I think that the $5,000 limit with $3,000 for potentially other things on a one-time basis like legal or mediation is I don't think many people are actually going to use that, but for the few that do, it could be very important. And I appreciated Catherine Avia mentioning that. And then as far as relocation, I think that should be relocating them really anywhere in the county. I don't think we can say we're going to necessarily relocate in the city. That would be a goal, but I just don't think that's always going to be possible. And the important thing is housing stability for that person. And then as far as how far the money will go, I think we really don't know. And maybe we'll have to go back and revisit, if there are tons of people using that additional 3,000 and the total amount of money isn't going far enough, then maybe we have to look at revising this in the future. But I think this is a good place to start. And we'll just see how it works. We'll make adjustments as necessary. So thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, I'm trying to find my notes here. All right, so my introduction to kind of an assistance program was with Monterey One Water. And we have allocated funding for the assistance program, and in no year have we spent through that funding. We're in the process of updating that so that it's easier for folks to be able to qualify. So there might be specific issues associated with that program, but in as much as there is a feeling that we will spend through this money quickly, there could also be a concern that we don't spend through all of it. And that's more of my concern if we don't, because now we're not getting the funds. They're just going to be sitting there and we're not giving those funds to those that might need it most critically. So I just kind of lay that out there for priming a little bit of my thought. And when I think what might be helpful is to think about this from the perspective of, hey, if somebody was needing assistance for 3 months, I think that kind of time frame seems somewhat reasonable to me. And let's take the average rent in Monterey, somewhere around $2,500 a month. That's about $7,500. So I know that's talking about giving more. Obviously, fewer people will qualify. I don't know if there's space to kind of negotiate that on the council to kind of just consider what that looks like in regards to making sure that we're providing the funds for those that need it. And again, really, this first year is going to be, it's not even really this first year because we only have a few months left of this fiscal year. But next year will be between this rest of this fiscal year and next fiscal year, we'll get a good sense in regards to, are we really spending through the funding? Do we need to change and have that flexibility? And I think let's just have that conversation again when it happens. One thing I would also ask us to consider is the idea of including homeowners. I mean, Alan, you were just speaking to seniors on fixed incomes, and there might be some that are still paying their mortgage and might have a serious medical condition that, whatever that circumstance is, and their Social Security allows them to qualify for low income eligibility. I just want to make sure that we're not limiting ourselves to renters, even though I think that that's a large part of the driver of this conversation. But if in my mind, the bigger goal is helping people stay in their homes. And that's regardless whether you're a renter or not. So just throwing that out as a thought. I wanted to clarify, is the additional financial assistance, does that include, I'm not sure if I asked this earlier, does that include utilities? Would that include utilities?
Mayor, I can clarify that and make sure it does include utilities.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. Yes, I would love for that to include utilities. This is a little bit of a side note, but the idea of legal services, I think this is a really creative solution that it looks like we maybe have some commonality in us moving forward on that. But I think there's a larger conversation for us to have around what legal services look like. I've talked to staff about this a little bit in regards to, is this a program that the city could take on in the future and consider to make sure that folks are getting the assistance that they need? And I'm just wondering what would be most cost effective for us to give money to some outside company, or have something that's in-house that we have more control over. We know our customers, we know our clients, we kind of know those issues that kind of exist within the city of Monterey, and we're better able to provide support. So just something to think about in the future, unrelated to this topic. I heard Esther's comment earlier in regards to payments going to the landlord and having to go through the landlord. You and I've talked about this offline, but just to kind of share more publicly, in as much as I am in recognition of the concern of fear of retaliation, and the example that Esther gave was, let's say the tenant is going to be required to go to the landlord to request that they get the assistance. Now the landlord knows that the tenant is in financial straits, and so there might be less interested in keeping them as a tenant. And in as much as that's, I think, a possibility that could occur, I think for the stability of the program, it's important for us to make sure that we can provide those direct payments. So that was a long preamble to say that I support us going in that methodology in order to keep the stability of the program. The idea of the financial counseling, I think, is good, but I think I just want to make sure that we keep it as an option for staff to have in the tool belt, depending on the applicant. I don't think somebody that, gosh, I had an example earlier in my head and I can't remember what it is right now. Medical condition, you know, they're good with their finances. They've fallen on their, whatever that is.
It's an emergency.
I think just staff having that flexibility and not making the automatic assumption that we need to spend resources on giving everybody financial counseling. I just wanted to clarify that. And then similar to a couple of my colleagues identifying here, I think it would be helpful to have some kind of definition and prioritization. I don't think it necessarily needs to be level 1, level 2, level 3 necessarily, but I just want to find a way of keeping us somehow locking in something that's legally tight, if you will, for discrimination claims. And so I think just kind of being able to define that a little bit, I think might help keep us safer. Like, yeah, they've fallen into one of these kind of categories that we've given as an example. And just to add a few more, just to kind of throw out victims of domestic violence, health and safety issues. When we had the conversation around kids, I also just want to make sure that if it's helpful to include expecting mothers as a category. They're soon to be parents. So I just kind of wanted to throw out a few other thoughts that were running through my mind there. The idea of the rent increases, I don't think should be excluded, because again, everybody's situation is different. So depending on what's going on with that person, it might be helpful to get that rent, just that marginal assistance with the rent increase that they weren't maybe expecting. And by having a few more months to kind of create a financial plan to make that work, it might work for that person. So I don't want to necessarily exclude it. Is it the biggest priority? Probably not. But when we look at the overall cost that customer is going to have compared to somebody that's going to need their whole rental, the rent payment assistance for, I think it's marginal. It's not going to dip into our funds too much. I'm not in favor of the idea of using Echo, or I'd like the idea of keeping this in-house. I think that may be something we consider in the future if we feel really good about somebody's ability to be able to run a program like this and do it impeccably. Yeah, I'll just leave my comments there. And then I really liked Gino's comment in regards to additional support for those that need it. We need to make sure that it really is case by case here. So how do we focus on those that most need it and how they need that support, right? So if they don't have a computer or whatever that looks like, we need to make sure that we have the flexibility in providing them the additional support and how it works for them. Three last comments here based off of the public comments. So the question around inspections came up, and I still think that's valuable to have. In particular, how you raised it, Anastasia. The idea behind that was to only use it if the reason why they were asking for financial assistance was because the faucet wasn't, why are we going to make offer assistance if we're not validating that the claim that they're making to us isn't valid? So I think it's an important element to ensure that we're not giving funds to somebody that's making a claim that we haven't validated. So I just offer support for the inspections piece for that narrow focus. And then there was the comment about increasing income gap cap. I'm open to that. Maybe something that we can consider next year. I want to be balanced. I'd rather offer a little bit more assistance for those that might need it, rather than opening up the aperture to more folks. And then the last thing is other resources. And I can't remember who made that comment during public comment, but I imagine that staff, that you're going to make that part of your process when you're working and interacting with applicants, that you're going to make sure that they have access to all the resources with the local nonprofits to make sure that we're capitalizing on all the things that they have available to them. So I just kind of wanted to provide a response to that. All right, that's it for me. Any other thoughts before we close out? Councilmember Smith?
Just a thought. I'm curious to know more about the ECHO, because you indicate you're not interested in ECHO being involved and you'd rather that be in-house. So you would be talking about increasing staff capacity, increasing staff that would be able to do what ECHO does. So that's probably something we need to talk about when we're going through budget process. Because if that's what this council decides they want to do, then that $250,000 is program money. Now we need to talk about operation money for personnel, which is, where's that money got to come from? So that's probably a better conversation to have in the budget process, but sometimes nonprofits that are already working and doing it, and we have a good track record with it, we can do the scope of services and have a contract that gives us what we need, but do it at a lesser cost.
So I want to ask staff regarding your comment here, because my understanding is that it's already kind of built into we've anticipated building this into our program. So I don't know if there's any additional staff that's needed in order to support doing this in-house. I think it's already incorporated. So I'll pass it to Hans to kind of, or
yeah, I'll let Anastasia speak first, and then I'd like to say a few words as well.
Mayor and council, definitely this was part of the thought process as we work with ECHO, Eden Fair Housing to utilize their services to build on what help us when we need to reach out to them. And if they do have an attorney on staff that works at a much lower rate than most other attorneys, I do know Monterey College of Law has workshops and services, but they may not. I will ask them and work with them to see if they could also provide any legal services one time for this type of program. But ECHO does also provide that. I will say, since I've come on board and I've had several interactions with ECHO directly with our tenant landlord issues, they've been responsive. I have called them. I have them on speed dial on my cell phone and they answer. And I've spent many hours on the phone with them over several situations. So I find them to be very helpful. I think that we could get a good partnership where we won't need their services too often. But when we do, I want to make sure I can call on them and utilize their services, both legal or just technical, when reviewing and helping people.
When I just want to clarify something real quick, the idea of actually the operating of processing applications, I think is what the idea was, or maybe I misunderstood what your comment was earlier when you spoke about using ECHO or some other kind of organization to run the program. It wasn't much just for the legal service side, it was more of just operating the program. Am I understanding that correct?
No, my comment was about, we always want to look for a cheaper way to deliver the product. And I think you touched on several. I'm not interested in growing the staff to be able to grow larger program when we have the opportunity for nonprofits that are surrounding us that can do it at a lesser dollar and maybe do it more efficiently. So anything that we can partner with, I'm interested in using nonprofits. But what I heard you say was, I was concerned that you were saying you don't want to use Echo and that you want to have all those services in-house.
Okay, I'm glad that we clarified this. That wasn't my intent to say that. I was making an assumption that you were speaking to the entire program and operating the entire program outside of the city, as opposed to utilizing them for the services that we already use them for.
Okay, I'm glad we talked about it.
So-
Yeah, no, I'm not saying turn it over to Echo. I'm saying utilize whoever can do it for the most efficient problem solving, getting onto the urgency, and provide us city resources with the least amount of cost, and to move that family to get the urgency and the assistance they need as fast as we can, and not have a staff that's burdened and then people pay in time. So it's a matter of using city staff and also looking wherever we can get the solutions in the community.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. Anybody else?
I wanted to say something.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
It's okay, thank you. I just wanted to say, I see right now 2 lines of effort here, and I want to caution the council of what you can expect in the middle of March. There's the line of effort. We want to create a rental assistance program that is up and running and will give us experience with this. And then there is another line of effort that I hear the council speak about that goes more into a social programming to a degree that goes further than what staff has currently envisioned. So when you talk about various aspects there that you just mentioned from the dais, that's another line of effort. I think that combined with the rental assistance program is absolutely valuable. So don't misunderstand me here, but that requires also other sourcing and other conversations with the council to really understand, do you want to set up this social program now that basically you have envisioned in some of your statements? So what I'm suggesting is we will continue processing the line of effort for the rental assistance program, and because we want to start flying, right? We want to build the airplane and start flying it and see how long we can stay above ground. And then we'll of course have to engage with the second line of effort that I think goes further and might maybe also require us a kind of regional concept, because for instance, why should the city of Monterey carry the burden of legal assistance here alone? We have renters in Seaside and other cities. Is there a way that we can jointly create something? So again, I just wanted to say that was very insightful and very helpful. And I want to say from my perspective, we want to stay focused on the next step, which is the most immediate line of effort. And then based on the input, also come back to you and have a conversation and a discussion and potential recommendation of how we tackle all the other elements as well. That doesn't mean we will not try to implement some of those, but for instance, when you say create criteria, by creating criteria and triaging that, instead of using first come first serve, that's when you open the door of discrimination to a degree, right? So again, we first come first serve is very appealing, because now you have clear criteria, and that's the time it was submitted. How do you sort through applicants? Do they have to wait 10 days to make sure that now you have a pool of the different cases you have, and you just wait and people fall out of their apartments then because we just say, hey, maybe there's a medical emergency coming, or maybe there's a senior in need in 2 weeks. So we will work through that and we will come up with something. I just wanted to say, let us do one step at a time and then tackle the other ones.
So just to clarify, I thought that was what was presented in the proposal, was to prioritize. I don't think that was something that was initiated by the council.
No, we had first come first serve in there.
But then I thought there was something that had spoken to being able to look at them.
Sure.
It was,
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify that. And then I agree with you. I think getting the program up and running off the ground, I'll just clarify, I think the only additional social service that I spoke to was legal services, but I clearly articulated that that's a separate conversation, like you said. And so we definitely need to, I think, have a deeper conversation in regards to what that looks like. But I think we have good feedback from the council and the public. I appreciate everybody's participation today. And thank you, staff, particularly you, Anastasia, for all the work that's being done behind the scenes, and your two teammates here that have helped participate in these public sessions. It means a lot. This is going to really help a lot of people in our community. I just really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. So with that, we'll go. Let me just make sure I'm reading my, yes, this is this special meeting. So with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you, everybody.